Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, Syria. The news media get back into the country with cameras rolling and hands tied.
For the first time, the Syrian Ministry of Information allowed us to come to one of the capital's hotspots for protests.
The rules of the media game, or lack thereof, in the brand new country of South Sudan. The media scandal that shut down a newspaper. Rupert Murdoch closes Britain's News of the World. Where does this leave the world's most powerful media baron? And a masterful fundraising parody from Wikileaks. Our web video of the week.
Donations lost due to banking blockade, $15 million.
There's been a change in tactics in the media war in Syria, the battle for hearts and minds. For 3 months, the Assad government had effectively locked journalists out of the country. Then, late last month, the door to Damascus cracked open just wide enough for a limited number of foreign journalists to enter. What followed was what people in the news game call a dog and pony show, the kind we're also seeing in places like Tripoli. News crews are given a limited view of what's going on, and they're tended to very carefully by government minders. Not ideal conditions to practice journalism, but better, the news outlets decided, than remaining on the outside, looking in, and relying largely on anti-government activists to furnish the world with reports via social media that can seldom be corroborated. Our starting point this week is Damascus, the latest turn in the propaganda war that is playing a vital role in the power struggle over Syria.
This is the Damascus suburb of Douma, and it is one of the areas that has seen numerous anti-government demonstrations.
The news organizations the Assad government allowed into Syria included CNN, Jazeera English.
We came to Douma, this time escorted by a minder from the Ministry of Information.
And Britain's Sky News.
We were the first foreign journalists to see and hear the government's version.
All of them knew going in that the images they would record and the voices they would capture would tell just part of a much bigger story.
We were very careful, and we discussed this at the highest editorial levels. How do we make sure that we adequately warn the viewers that we are operating in circumstances? We were told we could ask anyone in the town to corroborate their story. Our escorts were never far away. So there is a health warning before all of our reports that say that we are working, under the strict supervision of the Syrian government. But also we've had another reporter, Dominic Waghorn, our correspondent in Jerusalem, who's been looking at the citizen journalism. He's been looking at the videos that have been posted on YouTube.
These pictures have only just emerged, apparently taken on Good Friday in Izra, southern Syria.
And I think when you take those two together, you probably get an accurate description of what both sides are saying.
Now, every time we wanted to film, we had to take a permission from the ministry, and whenever we filmed on the streets, we had to be escorted by the Ministry of Information. But we still had the freedom to go and meet people without escort, and this included people from the opposition and activists, and the chance to see these people face to face. It's a great opportunity to really know what is going on.
There is a reason behind foreign journalists going in, and the Syrian government must have felt at a certain stage that it was almost in control of the situation on the ground, that it allowed foreign journalists to go in. It was able to take them to areas that it had quote-unquote cleaned from the opposition groups.
They're incredibly aware of the fact that the narrative internationally, the global story about Syria, is not in their favor. So they've decided to resort to both the carrot and the stick. So on one level, making sure that journalists who are admitted are ones that they can control, and those who are not admitted, well, they don't have the scoop.
The prying eyes of foreign journalists are back on the streets of Syria's capital, but the government is still at the steering wheel. What I was trying to allude to there is that the government were driving us everywhere. And I think one of the main tenets, one of the things you need when you're trying to report on a situation and a story, you need a translator if you don't speak the language, and you need transport to get around. And what the government have done effectively is control both of those. So to that extent, they are at the steering wheel, literally and metaphorically.
One tried, but not necessarily true way to sample opinion is the Vox Pop. Interviewing ordinary people on the street. In places like Syria, though, you don't know what you're getting. When Sky happened upon this government supporter, how could the reporter have known that CNN just happened to do the same?
So this man who is a resident of the area, or says he is,
I saw those reports and I was very much struck by them, particularly the second one, the CNN, where you could see the man walking past the reporter and then looking back and coming back to speak to the reporter. It was a different part of the neighborhood, Douma neighborhood in Damascus.
this is one narrative that we're hearing.
It is in a way part of managing the story. Authoritarian regimes have always had these planted informants around speaking to journalists and telling them the official viewpoint.
These people act as props, essentially. They're media props, and they could be moved around, but their intention is to ensure that there are people who appear to be members of the ordinary citizenry who are completely opposed to the protesters. It just shows that the government has tried to identify every possible strategy that they can use to control the message.
The authorities are not the only ones manipulating the media. Anti-government forces are not above doing the same by inflating their numbers at demonstrations such as one that took place July 1st in the Damascus neighborhood of Barza.
We went to Barza, and yes, there was a protest, but it was 200 to 300 people. When we went back to the hotel, we had all these emails from the activists. They didn't know we were in Barza, and they were feeding us all this information about the protest that took place on Friday. And they told us there were 3,000 people protesting in Barza, and we emailed them back saying, you know, we were there, it's 200 people, maybe you want to reevaluate and reconsider your numbers. But still, for the government, I think it was a plus, because for the TV networks that were there, they put the story in perspective.
We've spoken to one democracy activist who was talking about, kind of blood on the streets and, babies' throats being slit and the babies being thrown into the river, and there is no verifiable proof that that actually happened. But they are saying to us, you need to get that out. You're just swallowing the government's line. There's no doubt that there is propaganda coming from both sides, and you really have to subject the comments both from the government sources and supporters and also the pro-democracy activists as well to the same level of journalistic scrutiny.
Because both sides misinform the media if that's what it takes to aid their respective causes. However, there is no moral equivalency here. Unlike the Assad government, the activists have never locked journalists out of the story, the way the authorities had for months. They have never arrested reporters or deported them. The anti-government forces do not insist on controlling the media's movements in Syria, and they're not nearly as well armed, not nearly as threatening.
With an armed escort in front of us, we drove in convoy. What they're telling us is the reason that we are surrounded by people who do have guns. They are saying that that is for our own safety. They are there to protect us, and there are dangerous people who would like to do us harm. But I think it also sends a message to us that, we are very much their guests, and that to stray away from them to do some independent reporting perhaps wouldn't be such a wise idea.
And as I was walking in the street, another man came up to me and in a hushed voice whispered, "I can't talk to you, but there's a truth that you won't see."
Our Global Village voices now on the coverage, what there is of it in Syria.
I believe that after 4 months, the Syrian regime has finally realized that banning foreign press from the country is not only absurd, but it's also, more importantly so, to them, counterproductive to their cause. Over the past few months, they have been completely inept at delivering their point of view to the outside world. And it's mostly because journalists and reporters had so little access to the country and the regime.
Both sides value the significance of the media and convincing others of their viewpoints. Within Syria, the Syrian regime has run an effective media campaign in stoking fear among the people. As for new and social media, the Syrian blogosphere has been completely polarized by what's transpired, and that's making it difficult for those of us outside to truly understand what's going on inside.
The Syrian regime is desperate to change the media message. For months and months, all we've seen is occasional footage coming out showing how they're mowing down their own citizens in cold blood. By allowing foreign journalists in to try and manage that message, they're trying to change that. They won't succeed, of course.
If you've got an opinion on the news media that you'd like to get on the air as one of our Global Village voices, we suggest you join the thousands of our viewers who already follow us on Facebook and Twitter. They go to those sites to find out what stories we're working on so they can weigh in. Or you can just get in touch with us via email at listeningpost@aljazeera.net. Time now for Listening Post News Bites. It will be forever remembered in the media industry as the scandal that led to the death of a 168-year-old newspaper. The UK's best-selling weekly tabloid, The News of the World, is going out of business. News International, the Rupert Murdoch-controlled parent company, made the decision to close the paper after the latest tawdry set of revelations in the 5-year-old phone hacking scandal. When this story first broke in 2006, it was about the hacking of the mobile phones of British celebrities. Later, we learned the victims included politicians. Then, this past week, it emerged that the phone of Millie Dowler was hacked in 2002. She was a 13-year-old who was abducted and later found murdered. Initially, the girl's family felt it had reason to hope that she was still alive because her voicemail account had been accessed and some messages deleted. According to an investigation by the UK's Guardian newspaper, it was a private detective hired by the News of the World who hacked into her phone to check the girl's messages, and when the inbox got too full, actually deleted messages to make room for more. Police have said that that interfered with their investigation and that vital evidence may have been destroyed. That disclosure, as well as reports that the phones of the families of victims of the 7/7 bombings in London, as well as families of some British soldiers killed in Afghanistan, had also been targeted, proved to be the final straw. Prime Minister David Cameron, who benefited from the support of Murdoch's 4 British newspapers in his rise to power, agreed that the scandal was disgusting and merited a public inquiry. The following day, the announcement was made to shut down the paper. A few things to watch for now. Will Rupert Murdoch's company simply wait for things to cool off before launching another Sunday tabloid? Will this be enough to save Rebecca Brooks, who runs News International and edited The News of the World when some of the worst offenses occurred? And will this have any effect on the British broadcasting regulator's decision expected in the next few weeks on whether to approve Murdoch's takeover of Sky B, the country's biggest broadcaster? The U.S. government seems to have taken a newfound interest in the safety of Pakistani journalists. Either that or it's taking a shot at Pakistan's intelligence apparatus, and it's using the New York Times to do it. The Times published a piece on July 4th headlined "Pakistan's Spies Tied to Slaying of Journalists" about the murder of Salim Shahzad. The article quoted officials in the Obama administration pointing the finger at the ISI, Pakistan's Directorate for Inter-Services Intelligence. The ISI came under heavy criticism after the killing of Osama bin Laden for bin Laden living right under their noses. One man who knows how Washington plays the media game is P.J. Crowley, the former State Department spokesman, and he was categorical when he tweeted, "The story about the ISI role in the murder of journalist Salim Shahzad is another salvo in the ongoing intelligence war with Pakistan." One of the ways that Belarus marked its Independence Day on July 3rd was to block social networking sites to stop the celebrations being hijacked by anti-government demonstrators. President Alexander Lukashenko's government blocked access to Facebook, Twitter, as well as a site called Vkontakte, the Russian-language networking site. The protests were subdued by the authorities, but several journalists were among the hundreds arrested. Plain-clothed police were out to hinder the media's coverage of the demonstrations. Lukashenko's been in power for 17 years now. The media like to call him Europe's last dictator, and Lukashenko likes to call the internet trash. There could still be another twist in the tale of the Dominique Strauss-Kahn case, a story which has the French media fixated. The sexual assault case against the man known as DSK seems to be falling apart over the credibility of the alleged victim. However, a lawsuit containing another allegation of assault has been filed in France by a journalist. The story of Tristan Banon was dredged up after the initial rape charges were made in New York, and we've reported on them here at the Listening Post. Banon alleges that DSK tried to sexually assault her in 2003 after she interviewed him. Banon chose not to bring charges at the time, but is doing so now, 8 years later. The Banon case was an open secret within French media circles. She actually discussed it on a TV show there, named DSK as her assailant, but the producers of the broadcast bleeped his name out for legal reasons. France has some very strict privacy laws, and they are being put to the test in this case. Back in January, Sudan was overrun with reporters. They were there to cover one of the world's biggest stories, the referendum that would result in South Sudan breaking away from the north, creating a new country that marks its independence this week, July 9th. The excitement in the south at the time of the referendum was reflected in the media coverage from Juba, the capital of the nation in waiting. However, as the dust settles on that story, journalists in the south are complaining about a lack of freedom, a problem all too reminiscent of what they experienced under the Khartoum government In the north, the Listening Post's Adnan Ahmed now on the state of the media in the world's newest country.
Just 6 months ago, South Sudan erupted in celebration with the birth of a new democracy, an overwhelming vote for independence, bringing an end to 2 civil wars and more than half a century of domination by northern Sudan. One of the hopes for this independent country, the Republic of South Sudan, was for an independent media. At least that's what the editor-in-chief of the Citizen newspaper had in mind when he set up South Sudan's first ever printing press. But it has not been easy.
They always arrested me. Like last month I was picked just because I was saying that the police salary is not enough. So I was campaigning that the government should help the police, should increase the salary. I was arrested and taken to jail for some few hours.
But Neil Bowles' story is not unique. In the past 6 months, the authorities in South Sudan have reportedly raided media houses, detained and interrogated several journalists. In April, 2,500 copies of a newspaper, the Juba Post, were seized by the South Sudanese police.
There is harassment of journalists, but you can't put your finger on it as to who actually is doing it. According to our interim constitution of Sudan as well as of South Sudan, the police should not arrest any media person for what they have published.
But South Sudan's information minister is making no apologies. He argues seizing newspapers can be for the greater good.
Juba Post was actually agitating and inciting sort of intra-ethnic violence in southern Sudan, particularly in Juba. You are aware the genocide in Rwanda was actually through the press, through radio and through print media. We would not want an irresponsible media at this time.
For non-Sudanese journalists, outsiders, South Sudan's emerging media landscape looks disturbingly familiar to that in the north.
It's very similar to working in Khartoum, and the complaints people have about working in Khartoum, about having minders and being watched and being restricted, some of that does apply in the south. There's a sense of alarm that the southern government is beginning to resemble the northern government and that they have learned from the same people who oppress them.
In the north, the government has held a tight grip on the media for years. Broadcasters like state-funded Sudan TV know all about towing the government line. And since the referendum, journalists in the north continue to face arrest and intimidation.
Tens of journalists are facing trial every day. Some of our editors spend more of their time in the court than in their offices in the newspaper. I'm facing trial next week. I was also sued by the National Security Organ. The media in the south is subjected to different type of harassment. I think they are living under the same conditions of the media in the north. Sometimes they are living in worse conditions.
South Sudanese journalists hoping for a free press say they don't have one, that they need protection under proposed media laws that have been languishing for years in South Sudan's Legislative Assembly.
There are some ministers who would not like to see the passing of this law, which gives the media the right to information, which gives the freedom of the press, because there is a lot of corruption and they don't want the media to be free. Because if the media is free, they would be knocking at the door and say, where did you get this house from? How is it that your wife lives so expensively?
There should be regulations. Somebody have to work as a referee to control the game. But here we are now just playing without rules. And this is what the government wants. Because how can you have a game without rules? You must have rules.
The new government defends its record by essentially making a plea for more time.
The delay is, we are having independence on the 9th of July 2011. There are now bills in front of the parliament so that they could be put into laws that will be enacted and signed by the president. So these laws will definitely come out.
The Sudan People's Liberation Movement, the government of what will soon be the world's newest country, would not be the first movement to rally the masses in the name of freedom, only to fall short once in power on issues like freedom of the press.
They all came from a background of military, a background where you tell people you do it, you don't, I'll shoot you. It's not that they have had any experience in democracy. Democracy takes a lot of time. It's not something that you can say, here we are, we now are democratic.
The security, they are not aware of what is the role of journalists. Sometimes if you are invited even by the office of the president, they will go and chase you out. There's a complete breakdown of communication between the media and the security. We are surviving at their own mercy.
We are transforming a guerrilla army into a national army. We are building our police. We are building so many other things. And therefore, you may get a hiccup here and there. The government will be available to rectify anything that journalists believe is not there.
As recently as January, it was a very different atmosphere in South Sudan. The world's media descended on Juba, the capital of the new country in waiting, to cover an historic moment.
There's euphoria here, a sense of great excitement.
There was this sense of jubilation and sacrifice in history that you could really feel on the streets of Juba. There's a lot of stories in this region that are difficult, about suffering, about famines or droughts or wars or civil conflicts, and this was essentially a good news story.
That, in retrospect, may have been the easy part. For journalists in South Sudan, the power structure has changed, but some things have not.
We should not give up. We should keep on pushing, knocking, engaging. Members of the government of South Sudan, they don't like me. But when I go to them and talk to them, they will listen to me because I have a message to tell them. And it is supposed to be the work of journalists.
The challenge for the media in South Sudan now, and for the government they will cover, is to find a way to allow both institutions to fulfill their responsibilities in the world's newest country.
More Global Village voices now on the media trying to report on South Sudan.
There have been years of debate in South Sudan about laws pertaining to the regulation of media and to freedom of information. But as South Sudan heads toward independence, there are still a number of problems and challenges with the media climate there.
One time I was covering an event and I was grabbed, but even when I tried to present my identity card, it never meant anything to the authority, and my equipment was confiscated. Local media need to be protected by media laws, because I think that way then every journalist would feel they are working in really good environment without any fear.
I know it'll take years for the South Sudan government, comprised mostly of former rebel soldiers, to get used to criticism and the role of the media as a pillar of democracy. So they need to pass this bill as soon as possible to provide a legal framework for protecting the media freedom and the public's democratic right to information.
Finally, last December, we were covering the Wikileaks story when the site was dropped by MasterCard and a few other companies that Julian Assange and his organization relied on for fundraising. You may remember that internet activists then swarmed the websites of those corporations, crashed them temporarily, and taught the world what a distributed denial of service attack actually was. Everybody lost money on that deal. Wikileaks is now trying to make up for its funding shortfall with a spoof ad that borrows some of MasterCard's advertising lingo. If Wikileaks got a few dollars for every hit that this ad has attracted on YouTube, it would be much better off. But clicks are a bit like talk. They come cheap. Wikileaks' fundraising parody of a MasterCard ad is our web video of the week. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.
$20 secure phones to assist in staying anonymous? $5,000. Fighting legal cases across 5 countries? $1 million. Upkeep of servers in over 40 countries? $200,000. Donations lost due to banking blockade? $15 million. Added cost due to house arrest? $500,000. Watching the world change as a result of your work? priceless. There are some people who don't like change. For everyone else, there's Wikileaks.